Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear viewers, to another one of our live episodes of Huda Tonight, and I'm your host for the evening, Junaid Dar. Brothers and sisters, we have two very diverse segments prepared for you today. In segment number 2, we're going to be looking at the crisis that's affiliated or affecting Yemen at this current time. And in segment number 3, we're going to continue our journey looking at the pearls of the Quran, where, mashallah, they have reached somewhere inside of Surah Al-Baqarah. We will be taking the discussion from there. Brothers and sisters, as you are aware, you can see the conflict taking place inside of Yemen. And in recent times, you find that the geopolitical situation in the Middle East has been rippled with lots of conflict, lots of wars. And in recent times, the latest entrant to these wars and to these conflicts is Yemen. And many experts actually believe this to be one of the most complicated wars taking place in the Middle East. Even so, some people have even predicted that this war could possibly be the beginning of a major Arab war in the region. So the subject is very heavy, very diverse. So we have with us a professor who is qualified to speak on this subject. So let me begin by introducing him, and then we go straight into our discussion. So if I could begin by introducing, we have with us Dr. emaad.muhanna. I'd like to introduce you to the program. And you are a professor of political science and strategic studies. Doctor, I'd like to welcome you to the program with the Islamic greetings of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Doctor, as we've just mentioned in the introduction, this war in Yemen is beginning to grow and is having a big influence in the Middle East. Could I ask you to first give us some of the main reasons to why this violence actually broke out in Yemen?
Let's start by saying that the war in Yemen is basically another extension to the major Western mega plan for the Middle East to divide the 56 countries in the Middle East into 88 and having different spots of fighting and civil wars to basically reach that approach. One of these approaches started in Iraq, started in Syria, started in Libya, and now it's in Yemen. So it might be that the parties are slightly different, but very much the same approach that's been taken. In the end, we can say that it is really implemented to affect the national security of the Arab world, basically from the Gulf to the Atlantic. The fact here is that the war really, or the civil war, let's call it, erupted based on a fact that Ali Abdullah Saleh in the beginning was fighting the Houthis, all of a sudden became allies with them, started to basically fight Mansour Hadi, who is the legitimate president, which basically led to the flee of Mansour Hadi. From that point started to get very complicated, and by the day really affected the national security of the Arab world as a whole, started to affect Aden passage really when it comes to the trade. Here we see involved Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and we started to see a lot of Yemeni people fleeing Yemen. We started to lead massacres, basically mass killings happening. We started to see smuggling with weapons, and above all that, we started to see the involvement of major powers. United States on one side, we've seen Iran. Here again plays a very vital and a very hidden role, if you like. And that particularly started to appear on the surface after the agreement with the 5+1 countries on the nuclear program of Iran. So from that point we can say that it's taken a different approach, that Iran is driving again another force to divide the Middle East and create more chaos and affect the Arab national security.
Okay, that's very interesting, because last week on our show we looked at Syria.
That's right.
And we also, I mean, as you told us last week, that Iran was one of the major movers and shakers of what's going on inside of Syria. But Doctor, can I just ask to just go a little bit back, because many of us were not familiar with Yemen. Can you just give us like an understanding of what Yemen is composed of? Because I understand there are Sunnis there.
There's the Sunnis and Shia. Definitely, as it really appears in a lot of Arab countries, Sunnis and Shias, some Christians, some Jews in some areas. But I think here, as I said at the beginning, it really serves the conflict that was created by the mega plan that initially was introduced in 1907, the new Middle East, and the introduction of the new Jewish state in 1947. From that on, in 1945 was the first year where we see new maps for the Middle East.
Okay.
So the fact here is it's a conspiracy against Saudi Arabia as a hub for the Islamic, or the main Qibla for Islam. Secondly, you get the army of Egypt. So the conspiracy is around these two. So if you look at the initial plan, was focused on dividing the Middle East based on ethnic differences.
Right.
And that basically includes, again, some religious differences like Muslims and Christians, Arabs and Jews, and now you see Sunnis and Shias. And it really, it serves the purpose based on where it is. So, for example, you don't find a lot of Shias in Egypt, but you might find in Saudi Arabia and other parts in Yemen, for example, so they use that. So what they used in Egypt is Muslims against Christians. So whichever serves the purpose, they
So
tackle.
it's the external powers exploiting.
Absolutely. Whatever opportunities are there, they exploit it. In Libya, for example, it's not about Sunnis and Shias, it's about ethnic roots, some tribal.
Right.
In Iraq, you see Sunnis and Shias, and you see the Kurdis. So whichever is available for them to use, basically they will use. The conflict really goes back to a few years when one of the main Houthi leaders was basically killed by the organized army in Yemen,
Okay.
and from that on started to escalate. What I find really difficult and made it very complicated is the shift of Ali Abdullah Saleh when he was a president fighting the Houthis at some point, and now he's allies with them against Mansour Hadi, and is actually not just violating the national security of Yemen, but violating the national security of the Arab as a whole.
Right.
Because you can see the involvement of superpowers outside the Arab world and the interference of how things are going there, particularly that you have different plots in different areas. So it's becoming very difficult to really ensure proper national security. You've got problem in Syria, and again with the involvement of Iran. You've got problem in Egypt on the western border, what's happening with Daesh going into Libya. You've got a problem with Yemen, and you've got a problem basically with Iran northeast.
Right.
So you find that it's very much a conspiracy against Saudi Arabia to try to break down the system in there, and particularly from Yemen attacking from the south.
Also, Doctor, I would like to understand, prior to the ex-president of Yemen taking sides with the Houthis, you mentioned he was fighting them.
That's right.
But at the same time,
He fought them for about 8 years.
About 8 years also.
Yeah.
There was also, he was also fighting the Yemenis that were in the south of Yemen.
That's right.
What is the relationship between those Yemenis and the Houthi Yemenis? Is there a relationship, or are they independent?
The problem that we suffered from in the Arab world generally is the cultural erosion, where people were marginalized, and that's happening throughout the Middle East. People are not getting the right information from formal authorities, the media formal authorities, and from that on you find a lot of basically divisions. So if you look at the situation, for example, particularly in Egypt, in Yemen, in Syria, in Syria, and in Libya, situations are not clear.
Okay.
In the beginning, you get the impression that whoever is fighting Bashar al-Assad are just some Syrians that looking for freedom, and it turns out that some of them are Daesh and some are Muslim Brotherhood. Libya is the same. What you find in Egypt, the start of the Muslim Brotherhood, and now you find Daesh come from the West. So it's mixing papers basically, and this is the difficulty. And what helps you to control that and ensure a national security, or a stable national security for the Arab world, is the cultural understanding of people themselves.
Right.
And that basically helps leaders and helps the nations to basically get youth not to take sides based on no understanding or no awareness.
Okay.
And now you find a lot of youngsters are basically following Daesh. A lot of them are migrating to fight with them. And that, from my point of view, it's because people don't understand what's going on.
That's right.
There is a lot of mixing papers in the Middle East. Take that into your question in Yemen. The fact is the same. Fighting is everywhere, and is not the case, but it doesn't really, or it doesn't have to reach the point where the entire country breaks down and it becomes a civil war.
Right.
So there is no problem to have a conflict. There is no problem to have differences, but the problem is to have a weapon-based or a fighting-based differences, because people take the law into their hands.
Okay.
So what you have is political ideologies that are different between supporters of Ali Abdullah Saleh. That's the first group.
Right.
And then you get the supporters of Mansour Hadi, the legitimate president, and you get the Houthis on one side, and you get some fingers of Iran trying to support one against the other. And let's say that the external support that comes from superpowers that have agendas, it doesn't really rely on religious ideologies. They use whoever they can.
Okay.
So you find that the United States used some of the Muslim Brotherhoods basically against the national government. So are you saying, or can we say that they are supporting the Islam? No, they're not. They just play words. They play cards. So we need to understand that differences are not the problem. The problem is if people understand they have a full awareness of what's going on around them, and here the responsibility is ministries of culture, Al-Azhar in Egypt and in a lot of countries, Christianity with the churches, and all that can be covered by media. Explain to people what's happening and give them the right terms and conditions of the country.
So it's just like you said in the beginning, it's just people or certain powers exploiting weaknesses or sectarian divides amongst people.
Absolutely. And the first way, the most the strongest weapon they use is culture, education. So if you look at Egypt, for example, we're talking about 39% illiterate. So these people, a lot of them can be exploited.
Exactly.
Saudi Arabia you can see the same. Yemen, you can see the same.
And the most easiest way to exploit anybody is through that which is emotionally attached, like religion.
Religion, absolutely. And that basically what drives it harder, and it makes it very difficult to actually control. And you find people, and if you listen to even some statements from people from Daesh, you might find that what they're saying sound logical. You know, we spread Islam and whatever,
That's right.
and the return of the Khalifa and united Middle East. It's basically sounding good.
Dressed in Islamic clothes.
Absolutely. And that is based on the fact that people don't understand what Islam is all about, and it's the fault is on us.
Okay.
Governments, educated people, cultured people, they need to help others to understand what Islam is and send the right message.
Excellent, Doctor. Also, I would like to put things into context. We've talked about the Arab Spring in our last session, and I would like to understand, could you please put this conflict in Yemen in context with the Arab Spring? What's its relationship?
I think it's an extension of the Arab Spring, because it started with ousting Ali Abdullah Saleh. That's in the beginning.
Yep.
And let's be fair that there was some support from countries like Emirates, for example, to Ali Abdullah Saleh. That happened in the beginning, and that really gave him some sort of power. And I'm not sure why did this happen. Was it because they worried that the entire Arab Spring will spread in the entire Gulf area? But I think it backfired now. So you find that Ali Abdullah Saleh started to gain some powers in Yemen, and then started to take sides with Houthis, and from that on, Mansour Hadi became in another situation where they all became against him, and that basically drove the Arab world, particularly the intervention led by Saudi Arabia, to basically intervene, because negotiations are not taking place. So it is really taken again from external involvements or interference. This is how it became to the point where we are at the moment.
Okay, Doctor. Also, Ali Abdullah Saleh seems to have a stronghold in some of the violence taking place in Yemen. Right. Could you tell us about his role and how it has developed since he's been removed from office? How is he still influential, even though he's not in office?
Ali Abdullah Saleh enjoys a great, let's call large political support from a lot of people that basically against the Arab Spring.
Okay.
And the same situation that happens in Egypt. You find a lot of people are still with Mubarak. So the fact here is you still have Ali Abdullah Saleh enjoying a lot of powers in Yemen.
Okay.
And because we don't have in the Middle East generally institutions that can prevent people from that. And to explain that to respected viewers, let's look at the United States. If the same situation took place in the United States, you find a lot of institutions that can support them, can stop them. But here you don't have. The institutions, once the people or the leader basically withdraws, the entire administrative system of the country collapses.
Right.
And this is what happened in Egypt in February 11th. And a lot of Arab countries, as soon as Gaddafi was removed, the entire Libya admin-wise or administrative system collapsed.
It's a one-man show.
Exactly. And that's because of the personalization of power. the personalization of power basically leads to that. It's the one-man show. And once that person is not there, it's exactly like the father in a house. He's the one that says yes, and he's the one that says no. And if he's not there, what happens?
Chaos.
All members, exactly, all members of the family stood there, and nobody can take a decision. And that's exactly what is happening. So on the forefront, on top, you find personalized power.
Okay.
On the ground, you find illiteracy, lack of education, lack of awareness. And between the two, basically a lot of corruption. So if you look at countries, for example, in a very simple terms, it's a 3 layers in a pyramid. You find the leader, you find the administrative system of the government, and you find the people on the ground level. And the people on the ground level, we can easily say that half of the Middle East people are illiterate. We've got a lack of awareness. And on top, if the leadership is corrupt, that's what you find. And corruption in the middle, you find that the entire chain is bad. And that's basically what led to the chaos in Libya, in Yemen, in some parts in Egypt until the army took over. So what you have in Yemen, going back to question, Ali Abdullah Saleh still enjoys that power. Right. To answer that. So politically still enjoys a lot of powers. In terms of support, he's got a lot of supporters. And on top of that, he basically joined forces with Houthis to basically the country. And here we can say that the behaviors of Ali Abdullah Saleh, or his approach, basically takes Yemen into no account at all. Because he's not worried about his own nation, he's worried about his own powers. Because if he was, he would have withdrawn from this and give the legitimate power back to Mansour Hadi.
Okay, and I just wanted to add to that, you mentioned the system, this triangle system,
Yep.
and we can generally use that across the Middle East.
Absolutely.
And is it fair to say then that leadership intentionally creates this pyramid?
That's right.
Intentionally creates this level of illiteracy and education, so that the
Yep.
people are busy fending for food,
For their own
for
food.
bread. They don't
Yep.
even think
Yep.
about politics.
I absolutely agree with you, and I remember the say of Mubarak before he withdrew in February 11th. He said, "It's either me or chaos." Why did he say that? Because he was fully aware that it's a chaos after him. Why is it chaos? Because and we're not out of the subject, but just to give you an example
sure.
of what's happening on a large nation. If you look at Egypt, for example, in 1981, when Mubarak took over from President Sadat after his assassination, Egypt had 8 million poor, and the population was 42.5 million. So
Right.
you're talking about 20% poverty rate. Now look at the statistics, 42% poverty rate. So multiplied by 5. If you look at illiteracy, it was 7 million, 19% of the population in 1981, now 39%, 39 million.
Shocking.
So exactly, so the nations are getting poorer, less educated, less cultured, and that basically, add to that, the deviation from the main course of Islam, of moderacy, you find that this is what is happening at this point. You find people that are supporting terrorist groups not fully aware that they are on the wrong side, but because they don't understand. So we need to go back to cultures. And Ali Abdullah Saleh, just like a lot of leaders like Gaddafi, like Mubarak, they all played on the fact, exactly what you mentioned accurately now, is the fact that people don't understand what is happening. They don't understand their rights. They don't know their roles even, and that basically what leads to the chaos in the end.
Okay, fantastic. Doctor, last week we also looked at the Arab League, and you educated me on a number of things which I was very shocked about. But let's look at the Arab League in context to Yemen. So what have they done since the beginning of this violence?
What we talked about in terms of the Arab League and the voting system and the constitution actually applies to Yemen more than Syria, because Syria there was no Arab involvement in terms of military intervention, but that happened in Yemen. And to be absolutely logical and accurate about it, let's look at the voting system that took place in the Arab League in terms of military intervention.
Okay.
How many countries joined the intervention? 9. Where are the other 15?
Okay.
Because of the voting system. The voting system basically in the Arab League, or according to the constitution, basically very simple. It's a binding to the people that says yes, but not binding to the others.
Okay.
So the 9 countries that says yes, we want to militarily intervene in Yemen to protect the Arab national securities, it became obligation on them to join. But the ones that said no, like the minor, smaller countries, it's not binding.
Okay.
And that's a fact here, is that it should be amended to the proper voting. If the majority says yes, but then the 24 countries have to join.
Right.
But according to the voting system now, no. If you say yes, then you have to do it. So if you say, for example, we've got a military situation. If you say yes, it becomes binding to you.
Okay.
And if I say no, it's not binding to me. But according to the proper voting system, if the majority, like you, say yes, then I have to join as well.
Everybody must support that decision.
Absolutely. Even though I said no, but because of the majority said yes. But according to the voting system in the Arab League, it doesn't work like that. The vote is binding to the ones that agree,
okay,
but not to the ones that refuse.
Okay.
So if you look at the Arab intervention, and here we're saying it legitimately and logically to the respective viewers, why only 9 countries? Because the others are not interested.
Okay.
The Western North Africa are not interested. Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Mauritania, Libya, Sudan, they're not there. Gulf countries, some of them are not there. In basically Lebanon, Syria, are not there. So it becomes basically a burden on the 9 countries. So in terms of the Arab League, we still suffer from a proper support. You find what happened in Iraq, despite the fact that Saddam really did wrong in 1999 and attacked Kuwait, and he was, he threatened to attack Saudi Arabia. But let us be logical, because in the end, it's in Arab national security.
Okay.
And with the collapse of Iraq, Iran became on a border of Saudi Arabia. Let's admit that, because Iraq was the shield to Saudi Arabia against Iran.
That's right.
It's a fact.
Yeah.
Now, with the collapse of Iraq, United Arab Emirates is facing Iran face to face because of the islands. When Iraq was there, we never heard about that.
Okay.
We never heard about the threat of Iran and the involvements of the Shia and the execution of the Saudi citizen. All these issues happened after the collapse of Iraq.
Okay.
And what they're trying to do is weaken the powers in the Middle East. And one of them was Egypt. That's the plan. Once we have all these powers basically weakened, you find that it's very easy to get into the areas where they want to be, control the resources, and in the end drive people into chaos.
Okay. Doctor, I want to build on that, what you've just mentioned, the coalition.
Yeah.
And the use of the external powers.
Yes.
And from my research, the coalition countries so far, from what I gathered, was Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and even Sudan, which is involved in the coalition. What is their interest in Yemen? I mean, this is one of the poorest countries in the world. Why are some of the richest Arab nations coming together?
This is absolutely an excellent question, because the desire here differs. The desire of the Western society when they intervene or get involved in Kuwait, for example, it's oil.
Okay.
When they get involved in other parts, it's resources. But what do they want in Yemen? Nothing. And that's why you find the Western society is paying no attention to Yemen. So I'm taking the question from the other side.
No problem, that's fine.
What I'm saying is, we're going to get to the Arab, but why are the Western society not getting involved? Because there's nothing in Yemen.
There's no resources.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So why do I get weapons spent, number one, time, maybe soldiers, American soldiers on a Yemeni soil? Nothing is going to go back to them. But they don't mind interfering. And if you remember, and the respected viewers can remember, that the 5+1 agreement took place during that time.
Right, okay.
With the start of the Houthis fight and the civil war in Yemen, during that time, Iran had the agreement with the 5+1, giving them basically a lot of money. I think they got back about $46 billion that was frozen outside Iran. Okay. So Iran now has basically some sort of a free hand to play in Yemen, and that's basically playing cards, as we said. The Western society is not going to play, or not playing directly into Yemen, they're playing through Iran. Okay. Now, here, the situation forced the Arab world to get involved, because we cannot allow Iran to have a free ride in the Middle East, number one. Number two, it's on the border of Saudi Arabia, the greatest Islamic and Arab world in the Middle East. Number three, it's going to affect the economic situation, because once they put their hands on the Aden passage, you've got the trade, international trade of Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So the involvement or the intervention of the Arab world or the coalition was basically to protect Arab national security, number one. Number two, to limit the expansion of Daesh and Houthis on all fronts in those particular area. Number three, to protect the trade passage in there. And let's agree that Yemen is an important country to the Arab world, because across it leads to Central Africa. So it is one of the gates to the Arab
so it's
world.
more of a strategic decision than one of resources?
Absolutely. It's not driven by resources at all. And that's really the advantage of having the Arab League reformed, as we talked last time, and have a united, fixed and stable army that is all there. If you look at the army extension to what we said last time, once you have a proper constitution in the Arab League and establish an army, you can have troops on those areas. In Jabal Tariq, you can have in Aden, you can have in Hormuz, you can have on Emirates Island in the Gulf. And that army is not an Emirati army, it's not a Saudi army, it's an Arab army. And from that point, you find that Iran is not going to face 1 or 2 or 3 countries. They're going to face 24 countries. And this is really the fact or the advantage of having the Arab League reformed.
Okay. Doctor, I want to step slightly outside of the Arab world. But when this coalition was formed against Yemen, there was a lot of pressure put on some Asian countries like Pakistan, for example, to get involved. But they refused. Can I ask, what is the reason to why they refused under such immense pressure?
It was a wise decision to refuse, and I'll tell you why. Because this fact is an Arab situation, it's not an Islamic situation. We've got to be clear on that. Why? Because, excuse me, once you have it an Islamic situation, there is no harm of having an Islamic countries in there. So people don't understand us wrong. What we're trying to say, it's going to go out of hand and becomes bigger. So once you have Pakistan on the fact here, part of the coalition, you're not going to be really able to refuse if Indonesia wants to get involved.
Of course.
And then with time, it becomes a world war. You don't want that. You want to keep it small, and you want to keep it contact and surrounded. It is a small conflict. And let's say, how many Houthis are? 500,000? 1 million? So the fact here, it doesn't really deserve to expand the conflict into the Islamic world.
This is why, Doctor, I'm really shocked with the fact that, you said the Houthis are very small in number.
They are.
They're not even that well equipped, but yet we have
It's because of the land in Yemen. That's the difficulty of having how to fight them. It's a guerrilla and militias against an organized army. And unfortunately, there is a lot of corruption in there, based on the fact that Ali Abdullah Saleh is still part of the formula. So you really don't know who's who in there.
Okay, fantastic. I want to also ask you, Doctor, about the role of Iran, but from a different angle, with regards to supplying of weapons and finances and these things. Is it fair to say that the Houthis are directly being supplied by Iran?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They directly supplied by Iran. And I think it was a lot clearer before the Egyptian Navy moved south. So if you remember the first couple of weeks, we had a lot of support coming very clear. And from that, you can see the growing ability, fighting ability of the Houthis. It's definitely not relying on the weapons they had. Definitely there was a lot of supply coming. And the supply was coming from the Arabian Sea, from the Arab Gulf, Arabian Gulf into the Arabian Sea into Aden. So Houthis had a lot of support. They had a lot of plans basically drawn for them, because Houthis are normal citizens. So how do they get plans about locations of the organized army? How do they get plans and maps about how to attack Saudi Arabia from the south and go through the border? So for sure, they had a lot of support from other countries that have satellites. So Iran definitely has a major role in there to play. And that role was limited quite a bit to when the Egyptian army Navy moved south, and they still stationed there. at Aden Passage, and basically surrounding Yemen, to the fact that prevents people smuggling weapons or ships stopping in there to supply the Houthis. And you can see from that Navy shield that was created in the Arabian Sea, and the coalition attacking them by air force and some ground movements, I think that the situation is really under control.
Okay, I want to focus a little bit more on the Saudi-led military intervention with respect to the defense of the national security.
Yeah.
Do you think their intervention is actually preventing or securing the Arab security?
Yes, let's look at the United Nations constitution and how it allows people to defend, or nations to defend themselves.
Okay.
If you look at the situation, basically that Iraq attacked Kuwait, there is no self-defense here. It's a clear barbaric attack.
Okay.
But if you look at what is happening in Yemen, the United Nations allows nations basically to prevent or work in a proactive approach, if you like, to basically protect the national security. The expansion of Daesh really required quick attention, because you cannot allow, we're talking about vast land in the south of Saudi Arabia, a lot of it not occupied. So and the militias or Daesh are very used to that. So you can't really delay the intervention. And I think from that point, and on top of that, we had the economic effect, having Daesh occupying or controlling the Aden Passage, and it's going to affect the south route of trade. So here, I think the speed in forming the coalition by Saudi Arabia and involvement of Egypt and other countries, I think was wise, quick, to basically eliminate the danger right from the beginning. Because if you waited, hypothetically, 3 or 4 months, you find a lot of weapons coming to the Houthis. They became very organized. You might have ships and you might have tankers. And we're already talking about some of the reports that they already smuggled about 300 Scud rockets, the range of about 300 kilometers. So they do have some weapons.
Okay, Doctor, in just the last few moments, I've got a few questions, so we've got to be a little bit quick. Would you say that the main fear for Saudi Arabia is the Shia influence, or would you say it's the threat of ISIS or Daesh? What is their main fear?
I think they are both, but remember, sometimes the religious ideologies can be spread by weapon and can be spread by culture. And I think the Shia here approach is spread through both. Cultural spread, inside Saudi Arabia, and again, the Houthis approach with the support of Iran. And this is what Iran is trying to do. It's a Persian empire they're trying to build.
Okay, my next question is that, unfortunately, in all of these wars and these clashes, the civilians are the ones who pay the price. Can I just ask you to shed some light on what is
unfortunately, it is always the case. The casualties are all civilians. We had a lot of Yemenis, hundreds of thousands basically fleeing Yemen. A lot of people get killed. And a lot of people, I feel sorry for them, because sometimes they get dragged into Daesh thinking that this is the right way, or get dragged by Ali Abdullah Saleh thinking the right way. But the right way here, in the 21st century, we support governments as a legitimate approach. If they have corruption, we deal with it. If they are bad people, we deal with it. But we don't break the country.
So what's your advice for the Yemeni people? How can they get out of this conflict? And not just that, but also for the world at home. What can we do?
In the beginning, we have to follow legitimate political system that is there. If it's got problems, then follow it until the problems become clear and you change with your own hands in a right way, culturally, politically, ideology, with advice, whatever it is, but don't break the country. And I'll give you an example on Egypt so people don't, you've got some people don't agree with what President Sisi is doing, for example. But it doesn't mean that they're going to walk out in the street and break the country and you've got Daesh on the border. So you've got to weigh your options. What is it that you want to do? So Yemeni people, they've got to put the political stability and the nation right in the beginning. That's upfront. From that on, look at, if they have corruption, Mansour Hadi, for example, if there's problems that you're not happy with, it's going to get, with time, will get rectified and corrected. But from now, or at this point, you have to follow your legitimate government because that is the right way. If you have problems with them, later on, deal with it.
Fine.
But at this point, stand against Daesh because that's the right way, and the Houthis, that's the right way, and to keep the country very united.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of this segment.
Thank you.
And last week we had a look at Syria. This week we had a look at Yemen. So inshallah ta'ala, next week we'll be having a look at another country. And
the approach, and I thank Al-Huda TV for that approach, is to educate people and explain to them how the conflict is happening and in the Middle East, because in the end, that's the approach. They want a new Middle East with divisions and weak nations.
Of course, this is an academic discussion where we're trying to influence the minds of the people and educate them with what's going on. So, Doctor, I'd like to thank you for your time and your efforts, and inshallah ta'ala, we will see you next week as well.
Inshallah, I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I'd conclude and say assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, we've come to the end of segment number 2 here, where we had a fantastic discussion on the crisis in Yemen, and you can see, subhanAllah, how the external powers and also various Arab countries, how they're all playing a part in this war, and we can see who's trying to play with the power and who's trying to seek the power at the same time. Brothers and sisters, just like our guest said, that we have to come back to education. The vast majority of our nations are illiterate, and this is the cause for why we are exploited, why we are pushed to the right, then why we push to the left, and we're so emotional. It's not about emotion, it's about education. We must seek our education, and we must seek our rights. We have rights to move forward in the direction we choose to do so. So brothers and sisters, let's take a very short break here, and then segment number 3, we'll be talking about one of the most beautiful surahs in the Quran. So I'll see you in just a few moments.